Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. As always, we will start with a little bit of news, and for this week, well, on EVE Online front, we don't have all that much news. Nothing new really has been announced by CCP, and CCP basically held a friendship week where everything is focused a little bit on events, on streams, and on stuff to do in-game that's organized by CCP, and that's usually also led by some players from the community, which I think is pretty damn cool. But of course, I think the news for the week has been dominated by real-life events and the terrible war in Ukraine. I don't want to make this video about that topic. At the same time, can't really ignore it either, because it might just be the biggest news that'll have the biggest or the largest impact on the market this week. So let's maybe take a quick look at the New Eden store. I did notice that CCP announced a sale there, and here it is. So we have a sale on the amount of plex that's needed for 1 month Omega and 12 month Omega. So if you want to add a year now, you're only paying, well, only, it's always relative of course, 5,100 plex instead of 6,000, 15% discount. Same thing on the 1 month. So I guess you can do 1 month 2, 3, 4 times depending on how much you want to invest in there. But this is an opportunity for you, of course, to basically get more bang for your buck for all of the plex that you have gathered in game. Next up, let's jump in on the market. As always, we start with plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 150. Like that. And yeah, let's start with plex, where I think that we can't really ignore the real life events on this one. Of course, we just saw that CCP organized a sale for Omega time, and so demand for plex will be jumping up, but that was only for yesterday, and it only lasts up until tomorrow, I think it is. So the 4th, 5th and the 6th is when the sale should be going on. And yeah, you get these volumes in the last 2 days that are up substantially. So that's the impact from CCP's announcement. But a couple of days before that, you also have volumes that have actually pushed the price from plex up from a 2.8 towards a 3 million ISK. And yeah, it's speculation, I fully admit that, but I do think that yeah, the impact of the terrible war in Ukraine, and then all of the sanctions that have been levied against Russia are partly at least an explanation for this as well. I think the logic that will go here, I think it's also been shown in one of the Reddit threads, is that this will have a huge impact potentially on Russian players and thus on Russian bots as well. They saw a drop in daily active users across all time zones, which indicates that there's more of a drop for players that somehow, or accounts that somehow manage to stay online pretty much 24/7. And of course, we also have this jump in the price of plex, which is actually what the market tends to do when, well, automation and efficiency leaves the system. There's expected to be less supply and thus higher prices. And with less supply, we mean less supply of ISK through automated ratting and things like that. So if we go to the prices in JITA, we're way above 3 million at this point, 3.1 million for the sellers. Buyers have bumped up to just below 3 million as well. So that's definitely a pretty steep jump. And let's see what's happening in the player-owned trade hubs. Well, I think it's all happening right now. We basically get a double whammy for increased prices in plex. Number one, the real-life event, and then number two, we have, of course, the sale that CCP is holding at the moment. And this is the result of that. Everything is happening in JITA, of course, where things tend to move very quickly, and sellers are jumping in on the Perimeter Tranquility Trading Tower, because there they can potentially, I think, get a slightly better deal. We can see that there's also movement happening here in plex itself. It's very close, but we are up in price quite significantly, and we've got 2 volume spikes, one about a week ago, and then the other one a couple of days ago due to CCP's announcement. Let's see if this ripples through. Here are the multiple pallet training certificates. To my surprise, not really rippling through on this one. You would think that the market has, you know, a bit of a bit more would implement a little bit more correlation between these two. But of course, the reality as well is that we had this very big sale with huge volumes, and it is a very small volume market, so it will take quite a bit of time for multiple Pyro Train certificates to actually make their comeback and go back to those average prices. At the moment, we're talking 1.3 billion for the sellers and just below 1.2 billion for the buyers. I think buyers are starting to be forced up, so some of that oversupply, you could say, is starting to be absorbed, but volumes are still up from the regular averages, and that is probably why, despite what's happening with Plex, we don't see trading certificates jump up in unison. Skill extractors should be different, and well, we had basically a pre-move here, then we move back down, and we're just above 330 million. Interesting, did not expect this to move in such a different way. Also quite a bit of a different story on what trade hub is dominating. Here it is clearly the Tranquility Trading Tower, where the skill extractors are selling at 330 million, buyers coming in at 320. Perhaps everything is just so fresh at the moment that the markets that usually correlate very closely with Plex are lagging behind a little bit. But look at this data point, that's really weird, way below average down here. Not sure how you get that to work, but yeah, we're still well above 330, and obviously at the tail end here we are, I think, starting to see an upwards pressure on the skill extractors as well, which is kind of normal considering liquidity is probably being drained, as there is demand for Plex to turn that into game time at the moment. And that should also basically decrease supply for skill extractors. But perhaps there's just enough of it available that at the moment the skill extractor market can weather the storm. The impact on the skill injectors, large skill injectors, not really all that phased due to everything that's happening, continuing the slow downtrend down below 650 million on the chart. It's 646 million for the sellers and 603 for the buyers. That's actually a sizable margin that has opened up here and continues to be opened up by these buyers. So there's less demand, and that is what's driving the large scale injector prices down. Again, kind of normal. The full story for me personally is we had this high point, this high region in November, December, basically anticipating CCP's changes with compression, where I think a lot of players, although not everyone was for it, I for instance was hoping that the Orca would not get nerfed, but I think most players were expecting nerfs on the Orca and on the Rorcal, and thus getting skill injectors in order to be ready in order to change your pilots into whatever becomes the new meta was the preparation period right here. And now as things have been absorbed, the new meta is being put into place, we need less and less of it, and so you get this pressure on the price due to lower demand. Small scale injectors cannot buck the trend on that one. They're also heading down, as you can see, basically lowest price in the last 5 months at the moment, selling for just above 130 million ISK. First sellers coming in GTAP, so that again shows a little bit of, I would say, an aggressive want or desire to sell those skill injectors. And then the buyers are dropping down as well, back down to 121 million, which again is opening up, I think, a larger margin than what we're usually used for these injectors when they're at higher price ranges, when demand is higher than what it is now. For the daily alpha injectors, we are now apparently structurally above 45 million. It is going to be interesting to see if CCP does basically intervene here again. Maybe 50 million will be their actual trigger point, but the trend is undeniable. 47 million for the sellers of daily alpha injectors, and buyers forced up to 42.5 million. This is now your daily the daily amount of ISK that you want to make if this is your goal, and which my speculation is that for a lot of alpha players this is a goal that they set for themselves. And so the fact that we're back above 45 million, and I think we are here to stay, does indicate that potentially there's quite a bit of alpha players that are playing the game at the moment, and demand is staying pretty damn strong. We're definitely well above average, but yeah, this part right here stays very, very interesting, because this is something that CCP basically announced that it's their intention. They want those levers in hand so that they can basically function a little bit more as you could say a central bank in EVE Online, where they can decide to make or increase the availability of a certain item during maybe an event or a sale, like here for instance for the daily alpha injectors, and that's a way for them to actually keep the market somewhat in the place that they want to go. Now, planned economies are never really all that great, but we will see. Of course, this is CCP's game, and this is I think a perfect example of that. Daily alpha injectors went above 50 million, which is definitely a step up from a 40 to 45 million daily goal for these alpha players. And then a massive sale, as you can see right here, crashed the price down to something close to 35 million at the height of the frenzy, you could say, and now we've slowly been recovering over the course of 1 to 3, 4 months or something like that, and we're back at the high end of the range for daily alpha injectors. I'm gonna keep a close eye on that one because I think the trend is going to continue. I think the alpha clone playstyle is actually pretty popular in EVE Online, and that CCP is pretty successful at the moment in trying to get players to try the game, and maybe with all of the new player experiences, also with staying in the game. So we will see. If this goes up to 50, I do wonder what CCP is going to do. Then we've got the hypercores next that are up as well, and basically on a bit of a plateau at the moment, but clearly again the high end of its range at 310,000 for the sellers and 297,000 for the buyers. No clear trend, so this is still within the wavy pattern of the last couple of months. We will see, of course, if the plex situation will also increase the price of hypercores from here on out. Next up, let's go to the mineral market, coming in at 1155. There we go. As always, we start with titanium, and you may have seen that on the ticker as well. Basically, we are flat for the week. We haven't moved all that much, and while we had a couple of data points, daily average prices below 4.5 ISK, the market is trying to defend that price range. Will it be successful? That will depend on supply, I think. So we are talking in JITA itself, 475 for the first seller, 458 for quite a few. Sellers at 138 million, 240, another 100 million here. It's a lot, but I think this is not crazy oversupply if I look over this sellers list. And then buyers are back at 4.51, back above 450. Overall, pretty good news, I would say, for those that are still looking to sell their titanium. Even the buyers are back above 4.5 ISK. And yeah, a pretty interesting defense point for titanium. I kind of hope, of course, for those miners out there that we go back up in price for here. I think potentially we could do so if we don't get crazy volumes to come in the next week or so. We might actually nibble at this, and we can get to 480 pretty quickly on maybe 500 million units of titanium, which is easily tradable in like 2 days or so. So we will see how that works out. I think a lot depends on the supply. Which last week I think I was mentioning that maybe you should try to focus away from titanium and start focusing on Mexlon. Pyrite was still not doing too great, and here you can see that it's basically starting to try to find its range on this low price point of 1320 for the sellers and 1313 for the buyers. So that margin has narrowed. We do have a decent 400 million or something like that quantity buy order that should keep things from going even lower, but 100 million here, 67 million here. That's still quite a few sellers coming in here at 1320, basically desperate to get rid of their pyrite. So that's not your focus, but with the stalling in titanium, will we see basically more supply of Mexlon that is pushing that price down? No, that's a very big surprise to me here. I thought we'd see more pressure as players decide to focus away from both pyrite and titanium on those lower prices, but that's still going strong and actually touching touching 75 ISK on the chart, 76 for the sellers and 72 ISK for the buyers. So Mexilon is still your hot commodity in those high-sec minerals, definitely your focus if you're mining actively, and titanium is basically really doing its best to not drop below 4.5 ISK. On the Isogen front, we have our continued increase in price, very impressive, climbing to 200 ISK at this point. Super impressive here, 204 for the sellers, 185 for the buyers. We've got a couple of decently good-sized orders that are lying in the wait, but you know, the trend that I was mentioning here is that we are probably starting to run out of those very big reserves. Now, one of you viewers did mention that you've got a lot of Isogen that's ready and waiting for those better prices, like billions of units or something like that, and I absolutely do believe it. But what I do think is that players are starting to understand this dynamic, seeing this dynamic, and that also means that they're more patient, which is why on this front page, and yeah, on quite a bit of this front page up until 225, what we're seeing is no more sell orders in quantities over 100 million units, whereas in the last couple of months, coming in with 100, 200, even 400 million units was something that would happen from time to time, and that would basically stall these increases in price at certain price points. That seems to be somewhat over. There's definitely still reserves out there, but making it back to 204 for the sellers in my book is pretty impressive. And here I think we have to start to try and find what's gonna be the high point. Where will that supply come in? That will actually you know, mean a serious pullback in the price, because if someone does come in with a couple 100 million units on this normal supply demand situation where we'll eventually end up at, that should bring prices down quite substantially. So it's always a very tricky move, always a very difficult to predict situation for the market, but at the moment we're clearly dominated by higher prices on the difficulty for big supply numbers to still materialize. And yeah, it's not easy to gather 100, 200 million units of Isogen in a short amount of time at this point, since you gotta go and get it from low-sec. So we're at 200. I honestly haven't really thought enough about the subject, but if any of you guys want to speculate on the price point that will you know, either become the place where we'll start to see some real pullbacks on new supply, or where we'll start to maybe normalize and start to flatten out a little bit, I would love to see your speculation on that, because I'm starting to get into that mode. We have definitely completely eclipsed the price of Mexilon, which I think will have been a metric that CCP will be watching as well. And so now we are starting to get into the region where maybe it's still way too low. It could go to 400-500 ISK, considering where Noxium is, but perhaps 250 or something like that, or the 225 that this person here is shooting for could be the right answer as well. It's always difficult to say, but super cool chart, of course, when you've been calling for that for months and probably over a year at this point. Next we have that Noxium chart that is starting to move back down. So I think this is also very interesting and very important, right? Noxium is also mostly considered a low-sec sourced mineral, so it should have the same dynamic in Isogen, but you can see that they are moving in completely independent ways. And in my opinion, this also shows that Noxium has reached that price range where it is now moving in relation to active supply and active demand, and at the moment maybe there's a bit more supply or a little bit less demand that is pushing the price back down towards 1250. We're talking 1300 for the sellers and 1285 for the buyers, and then there is that big difference, of course, in those quantities. You can see 2 million, 3 million, 2 million. Those are the big orders in Noxium, completely different still from the Isogen market, although there those volumes are starting to shrink, and that means that this is the active supply, this is the active demand, and you know, we have found that price range is apparently above 1250 for the last couple of months, and now Noxium can start to go up on more supply, no, to go down on more supply in price and to go up on perhaps more demand or less supply. Very cool to see. Of course, I think eventually Isogen is going to reach that point as well, but yeah, be warned background, of course, there are still players that have watched all of this unfold and that have had the patience to not dump all of their isogen on the first, the second, or even the third increase in price. And who knows what happens? As always, difficult to say in a sandbox economy like ours. Next up, we've got Zydrine that was losing some of a little bit of momentum in the last month or so, went back below 1000 disc, but we are back above 1000 disc at 1040 for the sellers, 1020 for the buyers. Perhaps a little bit of loss in automation in the game could be attributed to that as well. You can clearly see that we broke through here about a week ago. Look at that volume here as well when that happened. I think, this is pure speculation and I don't want to harp on too much about that point. But yeah, nullsec is definitely a place where automation takes place in pretty big numbers, and maybe those terrible real-life events have cut down on that, and that could explain why we had a big dump in volumes, but we still increased in price, and you can see how our daily volumes are going down with increased prices, which is also not always the way things tend to work. Megasite had this happen a little bit before that. You can see this massive jump, and this was just on Eve Talk where we went to 1400 disc for Megasite. Did I say Zydrine? Yeah, it's Megasite. Anyways, I did mention here that it felt like we might be looking at market manipulation, where someone with a big enough wallet just bought everything up to 1500 and then started to relist the Megasite, trying to eke out a profit that way. And you can see that we have fallen back quite substantially from that high point. You can't really defend that against all potential supplies of Megasite, but I also mentioned that I think Megasite might still have a catch-up move to do compared to Zydrine that's back above 1000 disc, Megasite that's really struggled to get back towards 750, and so at the moment we are still up substantially after that big move. We're still at 940 for the sellers and 823 for the buyers, and where will we settle? That's going to be the really interesting one, because I don't really see how Megasite can easily break out from that. It is sourced from different places, but yeah, I think nullsec will massively dominate that, and they'll be all too happy to just settle at maybe a 900 disc floor. And then they have a big enough stake in the market and big enough organizations as well that they can basically decide to keep the price there. So it's going to be interesting. The pullback that I was expecting did happen here, which I think speaks to the fact that, the likeliness of this being some market manipulation, but dropping back towards 750 or below 750, I don't think is on the books anymore. Then we've got the Morphite chart that also basically stalled and forms another bottom, you could say. I think this one might stick, since we don't really have any news that goes towards all too much extra supply or anything like that. I don't think compression is going to have that big of an impact on Morphite, perhaps on some of the other minerals, but not on Morphite. And so as a result here, we're below 50,000, most sellers coming in at 48,400, buyers at 44,500. I think we are starting to find a new price range here for the Morphite market. Next up, we have the PI market coming in at 23.15. There we go. Here is PI. Let's get started. All right, very interesting. Another jump for broadcast nodes. Was it doing that last week? I think so. But where are we settling? 1.6 million for the sellers, almost 1.5 million for the buyers. Definitely not bad. Basically recovering to the low end of its average range for the last year. Quick recap maybe of the story here. In my opinion, advanced PI materials got that boost in demand because they became a part of building large ships, capital ships, I think a little bit in battleships as well. I'm not sure if that's completely correct, but anyways, we did see more substantial demand, and as everything else started to settle down, that meant higher prices for instance, these broadcast nodes with a very nice plateau towards 2 million at the high points in September, in October, and even here in August. But then CCP announced that they they were going to look at the production costs of these larger ships, and rather than play with those new levers that they had created themselves, so those new materials for these ships, CCP announced that they were going to go after PI, which meant a very quick decline down to the low end of the range at 1.5 million. Then, in my opinion, CCP made a little bit of a mistake of announcing that they were potentially going to add PI materials to moon mining, which completely cratered the market. They walked that one back, but at this point, everything still indicates that if CCP is going to work on rebalancing the production costs of larger ships, their first target is PI, which can, in my opinion, still be considered to be normal, because CCP's philosophy that it's activity in the game that should be rewarded, and PI is one of the most passive creation processes in the game. And so as a result, the market is very careful, very skittish. Then what would explain these increased prices? I think it is speculation on the fact that CCP said, yeah, we're putting changes to the blueprints on the roadmap. So CCP is going to look at these PI materials. And the thinking is that CCP was going to make it a goal to, for instance, diversify as well and make dreadnoughts more affordable than carriers. At the moment, they're basically in line with each other. And that could actually mean that even with a nerf to the PI needs, if CCP also does other stuff in order to, for instance, make dreadnoughts easier to make, it could mean more demand that could maintain higher prices for these advanced PI materials. It's a pretty complex story, but I think that's my speculation on what's happening at the moment, and why we actually have quite a bit of volatility and some volume spikes happening in some of these advanced PI materials, which in my opinion also could be why we have this stronger demand at the moment across the entire PI spectrum. Construction blocks here, for instance, able to stay for 2 weeks above 8,000 ISK. We haven't seen that in a long time. 8,750 for the sellers, 7,800 for the buyers. Still not a great price historically speaking, but over this 1 year chart, this is definitely a good time to sell. Consumer electronics, same story, making its way back to 8,000 ISK, which we haven't seen since April of last year. 8,150 for the sellers, 7,100 for the buyers. That's still a pretty large margin for this price range. And again, if I'm not mistaken, consumer electronics historically would have been around 11,000-12,000 ISK easy, and so this is still not a great price, but of course on this 1 year chart that's not so bad. Then we have, in my opinion, the strongest performer in these refined PI materials that we're checking. I don't check all of them, but I love coolants myself because it is tied to fuel blocks, which means that there is this constant consumption, which is why I actually love to produce coolants. And yeah, it's been able to stay above 10,000 ISK for almost 2 months straight. We got this little bit of dip here in early January. We get a little bit of pressure here, but still 11,000 for the sellers and just below 10,000 ISK for the buyers is actually a great price for coolants, a normal to even good price from the historical perspective, which almost all of the others are way below. Then we've got our cryoprotectant solutions back above 120,000. I don't really have a good explanation for this one. 125 for the sellers, 115 for the buyers. This could either mean that there is more BPCs out there due to the latest events that are tied to implants, because this has always been our speculation and our move for, I think, 1.5 years. I've been saying try to buy low, very cheap cryoprotectant solutions, because eventually CCP will come out in all likeliness with an implant set. Perhaps the latest volatility might be due to, of course, the compression changes that CCP has announced, which again is another avenue where maybe a new implant set could be announced because of that as well. Add to that, of course, the increased consumption of BPCs that have dropped in the event here in December, and you get a volatile market that's actually going to higher places on more speculation of better times to come than lower places, which, across the market we get stronger demand, so it doesn't really want to move against the market, despite the fact that it feels like it's already at a high point. It was already at a high point 4 months ago. Then we got enriched uranium below 10,000 disc, but again on the 1 year chart this is looking pretty good. 10,200 for the sellers, 9.5 for the buyers, bit less margin, so showing that stronger demand. In my opinion, still a little bit below the historical average. So if you would say, is this almost as good as coolants? I would say no, because historically coolants at 10,000 disc was normal. Enriched uranium, it's harder to make, so 12,500 or so. I would say that's its normal historical price, but it's 10k for a refined PI material, which is actually really good, of course, in the current market. Then we get our integrity response drones. You can see here managing to go back to 175 and staying there despite quite a bit of volume being moved on this one as well. 1.8 for the sellers, 1.7 almost for the buyers. Normal margin, pretty good recovery of the price. It's still not as good as the August-September period, but it's definitely, you know, a nice recovery from, well, the devastating announcement period that CCP basically had that was completely gutting advanced PI materials. The mechanical parts are, yeah, all right. Also another bump up here. Had a couple days where it was selling for 10,000 disc. That is recovering, but the trend is clear. 9,800 for the sellers, 8.5 for the buyers. We are going up in price on this one as well. 1 year high point. No, that was a couple of days ago, but we're definitely still in that region where we're getting way more from our mechanical parts than we've done at any other time in the last year. Then we've got nanites making its way back above 5.5. All right, not great, of course. It's refined, so 10,000 would be that reference price, but it's still 5,700 for the sellers, 5.2 for the first buyer for something that has cost around 5,000 disc on average for most of the year. Nano factories are breaking out, 1 year high point. You know, I'm not really sure, but this to me feels like, yeah, a big move, quite a speculative move as well. Going up to 124 million for the sellers, 1 million for the buyers. Very, very impressive. As I've said, I think this is speculation on the changes that are potentially coming, but that have not yet been announced by CCP. Organic motor applicators also, you know, trying to come back a little bit, but still not as good again as that September-August period here. We are talking 740 for the sellers and 684 for the buyers. So you can see the volumes that you know, indicate that speculation, in my opinion, but apparently this market is large enough that it's able to absorb that without too much of an impact on the price. Recursive computing modules, yeah, definitely making a comeback here as well, heading back for 125 million, which is actually the October high price as well. 1.3 million for the sellers and 1 million for the buyers on really not a lot of supply. Again, we do have a couple of volume spikes, which I think are indication that there's speculation at play, but here it could also be a bit of a supply problem. Then we've got our robotics staying around 70k. Again, the historical perspective is that this is still like 30% below the normal price. But yeah, most sellers are coming in at 73,000 now, buyers at 66,000. Self-harmonizing power cores crawled away, or no, actually shot up from that 1 year low point at 1.1 million. Not really willing to break out just yet, but you know, you can also, in my opinion, see that volumes have been declining. If the volumes that we have seen in the other advanced PI materials all of a sudden find its way here in the self-harmonizing power cores, we could be back at the 1.5+ million pretty easily. At the moment it's 1.4 for the sellers and just below 1.4 for the buyers. Yeah, this is, in my opinion, primed to go towards a 1.5, 1.6 pretty easily on someone that's doing that speculative move, but perhaps there's reasons why they don't want to move on self-harmonizing power cores, of course. Where were we? Yep, sterile conduits next. Another very nice recovery to 1.1 million. Yep, that's for the sellers, just below that for the buyers. So pretty impressive. And again, you can see that the speculative volumes here, where people are, yeah, just deciding to buy everything that's not too low or too high in price, excuse me. And this, I think, is in anticipation of what will CCP do exactly if they don't only hit PI, but also perhaps make changes between the ship classes and things like that. Then this could be very good for demand, and the higher price could perhaps be maintained, even if the consumption per hull might go down. Then we get the Yukomi superconductors, a counter trend. This one is going back below 70,000 discs, 71.4 for the sellers, 67,000 for the buyers. No market moves completely uniformly. And then we get to wetware mainframes going back up here as well. Look at that, even data points at 175. That is being plugged by supply, but you can see it's fresh supply in the last couple of days that works its way below 175 million. Buyers are at 1.5 million almost. And are we seeing the volumes? Yeah, here are those, in my opinion, speculative volumes yet again. So actually a pretty interesting week here in the PI market with I think stronger demand across the board, especially in the more basic materials, but quite a bit of speculation that might be fueling that on the advanced PI materials. All right, now I'll take a quick drink before we move to advanced moon mats. There we go, so advanced moon materials coming in at 35.10. There we go. As always, we start with the carbides that were dropping, falling off a cliff almost, and yeah, this was actually kind of to be expected. We went below 125 on crystalline carbonate, and that's where the market said that's really a 5-day moving average below the entire chart by basically a full segment of the of the chart here. So 25 ISK difference. That's something some or enough people are going to buy to push us back to that 125. But look at how careful they are. 5-day and 20-day moving average coming together right on at 125. So I'm suspecting that actually even below that 123 for the sellers. 115 for the buyers. So the market is very, very careful, not willing to push back to a 150 or anything like that, but crystalline carbonates below 125 are attractive enough. Then we've got the Caldari ones, always have to look a little bit, but here we go. Titanium carbide starts to flatten out below 150, which could feel like it's the same thing for the market, but again, right, we have stalled our downward trend. But then we just start to move sideways and we're not really willing to push back above 150 on titanium carbide. 135 for the sellers, 110 for the buyers. Pretty obvious that there is a lack of demand here. I also think that at the moment most players don't expect this situation to change because this is probably a consequence of, well, no major war in nullsec, everything stabilizing and moon mining basically becoming very attractive, very active, and being done quite a lot in the new mining meta. Then we get the Minmatar one, which is Fernite carbide. A bit of a volume bump here, but you can again see did move the needle a little bit on that 5-day moving average. As we touched 125, basically people started to come in on the market again, but it's easily absorbed and we're basically starting to move sideways at this very low price range. 132 for the sellers, 130 for the buyers. So here it's a 130 for Fernite carbide. And then finally we get tungsten carbide for Amar. That is a little bit more of a wavy move with again volumes coming in as we touch 125. So the cheap stuff is clearly being bought, but no one is willing to go, all right, I'm actually going to start to invest in this up to a 150 or something like that. 128 to 124 for tungsten carbide, which I think is a very smart move. That's exactly how I would be looking at all of this as well. Just try to buy those really, really cheap things that are clearly complete trend breaks. Be careful not to spend too much either. You never know if we go to an even lower price point. But yeah, that's exactly what the market is doing, which I think is very smart. And also shows that the expectation is that this oversupply situation, for now at least, is here to stay. On the metamaterials front, we've got photonic metamaterials for Caldari production, trying to defend 10,000 disk, but it's having a pretty hard time of doing that. And there we go, we broke it. Sellers below 10,000 disk, buyers at 9.9. Definitely a low end of the range as well. Kind of wonder if we'll see that dynamic. You can see that here when the chart went below 10,000 disk, we get a little bit more volumes, not as pronounced as with the carbides, but it's there, pushing the price back to probably 11K or something like that. The pressure is mounting again. Perhaps we'll see some increased volumes that will push us back up a little bit as well. But yeah, an oversupplied market for sure on this one as well. Then we've got non-linear metamaterials for Caldari. That's a little bit of a trend break. We are all of a sudden finding our way back to 20,000. Now, I don't think we're going to break that, but we are talking just below 20,000 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. And this is a dynamic that might eventually take hold as well, of course. Although I think in the carbides, they're basically so ubiquitous, that's going to be hard to do. But perhaps non-linear metamaterials, you can see here, are hard enough to produce that you do get a production response to those low prices as well. As we stay below 20,000 discs, there's very little reason to make lots of non-linear materials or to bring them to the market. So we dry up a little bit. That is why these sellers are drying up, and that is going to push up the price. And then those buyers are forced up, because this is an imported good, to that 19,350 range. But I think that'll be very niche, only for those that find themselves lucky enough to be in that situation that the oversupply trend can be broken as people decide to make other stuff on these super low prices. For plasmonic metamaterials, we're at a 1-year low point, and so that's interesting. The market that through all of this volatility since April with the changes to industry, that has basically remained the most stable material across the board, in my opinion, really easily staying within a decently consistent band, is starting to move in different ways. So we get, we just saw this one is bottoming out, but Caldari is actually pushing back to 20,000 ISK here, and at the same time the Minmatar one is breaking down below 15,000 ISK and is going to a 1-year low point. 13,750 for the sellers, 13,580 for the buyers. That margin still is super narrow, but it's pretty obvious that here we're in a massive oversupply situation, and that's something we haven't seen for like 1.5 years, I think. Now we actually have differences in how these different metamaterials are acting at the moment. And finally, we get terahertz metamaterials. That's also under pressure, quite obviously. 13,230 for the sellers, 13,000 for the buyers. Pretty cheap stuff at the moment. Pressure is mounting, and on some unique ones, which at the moment is basically the non-linear metamaterials, we do have, I think, a production or supply response to those low prices. Next up, we've got the other advanced moon mats, which is here from ionic condensates. Not what I expected. I thought we would see pressure continue across the board, but on this one, on hardly any volumes, we jump from 60,000 ISK to 77,000 for the sellers. Buyers forced up to 70k. It's only a couple though, so it could go back down quite quickly, but we do have a jump in price in fermionic condensates. I don't have too good an explanation for it. If we go back to 60k very quickly, it's probably going to be speculation, but you don't see the volumes for that, so I'm not sure. Then we've got ferrogel. That's more in line with what I would expect. Continuing down another step, 1-year low point towards 25k, 26 for the sellers, below 26 for the buyers. Then we get fullerized flat on that below average price, below 700, also in line with expectations. Hypersynaptic fibers, another step down, now heading towards 8,000 ISK. 8.4 for the sellers, 7.7 for the buyers. They're like, yeah, we don't want that, even at 8,000 ISK. Give us hypersynaptic fibers below this. And the fact that these average prices are going down means that some people are selling to those guys. Then we get nano transistors. Had a big dump last week to 3,500 ISK. A little bit of a bounce here, but will that be a dead cat bounce? It's possible. 3,750 for the sellers, 3,700 for the buyers, bouncing off of 3.5. We'll see where we head from here. Then we get phenolic composites, another 1-year low point. Yeah, that's not good news, I think, for people that are looking for higher prices for advanced moon materials. Breaking the 1250, 1170 for the buyers, for the sellers, zero buyers in this market. 1,000 ISK is what they're willing to pay. Very opportunistic, but yeah, desperate sellers make for good times, of course. For those buyers, pressurized oxidizers. Let's try to get the The vibe here definitely trading at the low end of the range, just above 10k. Reinforced carbon fibers, let's see if we can get that to show here. Also low end of the range below 11,000 ISK. Then we get our ceramic fibers, 1 year low point. So yeah, the other advanced move materials are clearly under pressure, and we get a strange fermionic condensate exception, which considering the rest of the market, I'm expecting to be plugged super quickly, and we'll be back at 60k in no time. Let's see what the impact is on Tech 2 ships at 44.30. There we go. Obviously, with all these advanced move materials under pressure and a calm nullsec, it's relative, but relatively calm nullsec, I don't expect to see a lot of major moves up, so we're still hunting for the cheapest possible ships. And there we go, Basilisk, 1 year low points, 5-day moving average below 180 million, 176 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. Yeah, on this 1 year chart, this looks absolutely great. You had several buy opportunities here and here already, but I think I've always warned you guys to not just go in gun-ho, spend all your ISK on a 1 year low point, because you never know when this might happen. And at the moment, you can see that just a couple of days ago, people actually snagged up Basilisk for less than 160 million ISK. So a little bit of competition is coming in here, but super pronounced 1 year low point and way cheaper Tech 2 ships all of a sudden. Cerberus is not able to defend 200 million, so here again, same story, 1 year low point and a new range, 196 for the sellers, 162 for the buyers. Definitely, you know, cheap Tech 2s, have the patience for a buy order, be aggressive there, I think, or you know, be not too aggressive in the sense that don't overshoot. Don't say I'm gonna go for a 166 or something like that to make sure that I get my Cerberus. Of course, you have to decide yourself how aggressive you want to go there. But on this down market at the moment, I would be very careful and really try to grab the cheapest ones. Then we've got the Guardian, same story, breaking 170 on the 5-day moving average. Haven't seen that all year. 169 for the sellers, 163 for the buyers. A little bit less margin, but yeah, if you can grab a Guardian below 165, that's down here on the chart. Starts to feel really good, but make sure that your powder, at least some of your powder, is still dry. The Hound is landing on 22.5. Is there more pressure to be spotted? No. So here we get a little bit more aggressive buying. 23 million for the sellers, 21.5 for the buyers. This to me is, well, maybe it's normal that in these times it's the smaller ships that are seeing more competition, and it's the larger ships that are actually seeing those real discounts. But I've always loved doing the trading in these stealth bombers, because they are of course quite a bit less of a threshold than to have to spend almost 200 million for a single ship compared to 20 million. But yeah, it's harder to do. We're definitely at the low end of the range, but it's not a pronounced 1 year low point like with the 3 previous ones. Iquitursa is being bought as we broke 600 million, so players and speculators that are watching these markets are definitely there. Iquitursa back to 640 for the sellers and still 583 for the buyers. So I think the story here is that on the oversupply situation, you could easily grab Iquitursas below 600 million on that oversupply run, but eventually that stops, of course, and now it's a little bit too late. You're gonna have a very hard time to trigger these buy orders. You're forced to go pretty aggressive here, which is different right now, right? The Basilisk is basically, yeah, it's ending that downtrend, but you still have a good chance of grabbing a cheap one. The Ishtar 1 year low point at 180, 176 even for the sellers, 170 million for the buyers. Very cheap again. Could have bought here, could have bought here, but as I warned, you know, don't spend all your ISK there. Make sure you get a little bit more so that you can keep lowering your averages. Then we get the Manticore, very interesting breakthrough on 22.5, but also landing very quickly on that 22.5. So going below 25 is nice, 23.5 for the sellers. But look at the aggressiveness of these buyers. You could say despite the fact that there's not that many of them, or is it desperation from the sellers, but they're not willing to go back to like a 20 million or anything like that. It is a 1-year low point, so I would definitely say, yeah, you can grab cheap manticores at the moment. But the margin isn't really there, and we do not have this jump back or something like that. We're slowly landing here, which is interesting. It's definitely different for the stealth bombers. The Munin close to a 1-year low point, going below 180. 172 now for the sellers, 167 for the buyers. Yeah, can definitely grab a cheap one. The Nemesis is our one exception, landing now on 19 million ISK. So we get 19.2 million for the sellers, 18.2 million for the buyers. You're probably easily grabbing a Nemesis below 19 million, which, you know, if I were to have to choose, you know, on the smaller ships, yeah, it would obviously be the Nemesis below 19 million rather than the Hound at 22.5 and the Manticore at 22.5. Then we have our Olneros, that's bumping up, so that's more in line with, all right, 1-year low point, buyers coming in, we're bumping back up a little bit, so 165 to 152, you're still able to try and buy a cheap one, but you know, last week or 5 days ago was probably your best opportunity. The Panther staying below 1.1, let's see. Yep, still below 1.1 billion for the sellers and just above $1 billion for the buyers. So I'd still say that that's on the cheap side, which, you know, reflects advanced moon materials. The Purifier slowly under pressure, not yet a 1-year high point, and also still at 22.5, but this is better news, 22.5 for the sellers, but the buyers are gone. They're below 20 million. This is a yes for me to try and grab a Purifier below 20 million ISK. Makes sense to me. Then we get the Scimitar, another 1-year low point. Look at those volumes. So, you know, probably yesterday was like your best day to try and snag one below 160. It's going to be a little bit harder now, but clearly Take Two ships are going down in price quite substantially. Widow staying below 1.1, I think so, yeah, definitely just above $1 billion for the sellers, below $1 billion for the buyers. And finally the Zealot, also 1-year low point below 170 on average. 170 for the sellers and 160 for the first buyer. Get rid of this one and you're at 153, and you're again in that place where, all right, buy a super cheap Zealot, you know, put one of those buy orders at just above the best one for a single ship, and hope that it triggers eventually. That's the way I would play this out. I'd still be very careful, but clearly in the Take Two ship market, lots of 1-year low points, lots of bargains to be had, and I really like the Nemesis below 20 and even the Purifier below 20. I'd actually tried and grab that. I would love to grab that because I think the potential in the Purifier is higher than in the Nemesis. But pretty interesting. If you're looking for cheap Take Two ships, this is definitely the time to go and look for them. Then we get the Take 3 ship market next at 52 minutes. There we go. As always, we start with the destroyers. Here is the Confessor market below 55 million. I think supply last week was normal, and I'm expecting more of the same. 54 million for the sellers, 50 million for the buyers. So yeah, this is actually a little bit low. And then in the last 24 hours, even 48 hours, basically have seen no Confessors being brought in. That is interesting. Where is that supply gone, despite the fact that we're well above 50 million ISK? Let's see if we can find it. The Hecates are landing at 50. Just below for the sellers, 46 million for the buyers, and here we still have half a page normal supply for maybe even a slightly too low a price. And then we get the Jackdaw, that's also at 50. Yeah, 49 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers. Still a little bit of supply, 99 here a couple of days ago. It's probably going to keep things in check. Honestly, I think the Jackdaw and the Hecate have enough to absorb a little bit less supply without necessarily going up crazily in price. So I think our next move to expect here is the Confessor to make its way to 50 as well on new ships being brought in, because, well, you'd rather bring in some Confessors than Hecates or Jackdaw at the moment. And then we get this Vapel that, yeah, despite the fact that all the others are 50 and above, or 49 and above, we're going down for this Vapel to 45 million, 45 for the sellers, 44 for the buyers, and the lack of demand is really quite glaring. So I'm not sure. I'm sure CCP has all of the usage metrics, but perhaps if you want that full tactical destroyer market to function in line with each other, then you might need to look at doing something for the Zweepel to make it a little bit more popular, because at the moment it's really clearly trading at a very low range, not super popular. There's no demand for it, and the supply-demand mechanics do work between the Confessor, Hecate, and Jackdaw, but the Zweepel has completely decoupled from that market. And then on the cruiser markets, we've got the Legion that's slowly bumping up from that 180. So yeah, below 180 on the chart was obviously a buy opportunity for some cheap Legions. 185 for the sellers, and 170 almost for the buyers. So you probably could have bought cheaper about 10 days ago. Then we've got the Loki that's actually making its way up to 250. Really? Yeah. Oh no, 205. It says 250 here. All right, so that's being plugged then. Lost 24 hours. Okay, a couple of days ago, I think someone came in and bought a lot of them. But the supply is bringing the price back down to 205 pretty quickly, which is over here on the market. Yeah, okay. I'm still not sure where I would jump in on the Loki, but a little bit of volatility is clearly here. Then we get the Proteus. Yeah, pretty average here, 185 to 171. And finally, the Tengu, a little bit of pressure on this one coming from 200, 192 to 178. You're buying below 180. I think you can try on this downtrend, right? If you have to do something in the strategic cruiser market, I'd probably try to grab a Tengu below 180. That seems like a good deal, because selling at 200 and above should easily be doable. And then finally, we have the extra product for the week, which is going to be ice products. It's been a while, so let's take a look at those at 55.40. And there we go. So we are talking about manufacturing and research, materials, and ice products. Let's see here. Heavy water, after the lovely December jump from 50 ISK to 150, is slowly and continuously losing ground. Lost 50% in the last couple of months, down to 79 for the sellers, 62 for the buyers. Then we get helium isotopes, 1 year low point landing on 500 ISK. Isotopes are super cheap at the moment. Again, I think it's also due to the situation in Nullsec. That's pretty quiet. No big war, no need to move massive fleets around, no need to use too much of these isotopes and things like that. So we are settling down quite nicely. Hydrogen isotope, same story, settling on 500 ISK. Let's maybe go through all the isotopes first, because I'm expecting that to be the exact same. Yeah, all of them landing on 500 ISK, very cheap, 1 year low point. That's unfortunately the situation. Then we get liquid ozone, also 100 ISK, very, very cheap. And finally, we've got strontium, that's also very cheap at 2000 ISK here at the moment. So the ice products on these 1 year charts are definitely not doing great. Our only exception is heavy water, but that is just, relenting under the pressure. That price is going back down. It's already back down to 75, 80 ISK or something like that, which is basically the low end of the average, you could say. And I don't think it's going to stop. So pressure is on, unfortunately, for the ice miners. Yeah, ice products are not too hot at the moment. Mexalon seems to be a slightly better choice, in my opinion. But we'll see how it all works out, of course. We never know what happens next. But that's going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching and listening. And as always, I'll see you next time.